Hello, everybody. Let's do a quick check, and you guys tell me if you can hear me. Um, Last week was a disaster. So, oops, can't be like a mirror. Okay. I hope you can hear me. Um, if you can't, woohoo! All right, we've got confirmation. Yeah, that was a disaster last week. Um, yeah, and I apologize for that. I'm sure I did something wrong with the settings. Anyway, I can't remember what Sean's questions were last week. Let me see if I have it in my phone. So I remember one of the questions that he had. Hello, Seppo. Uh, One of the questions, and hello, Larry. I didn't say hello. One of the questions he had was, can he take licks out of my free improvisations and use those to study? And of course, you can get whatever it is that you want from whatever source you want. Um, I still think it's better, and I don't mean to push this so much, um, because there's more and more people now that like my playing and they want to study my stuff. They want to listen to my playing, and there's more people that are saying that. But if you're my student, I really want you to explore the classic players, right? Clifford Brown and Freddie Hubbard. Excuse me. Um, I really want you to go in that direction. It's not like, well, you know what? Think about all the great musicians I've had the privilege to work with. Um, there's a guy who passed away not long ago, Mike Harris, and back, I don't know, the towards the end of the '90s, I was going to all the gigs with micro cassette players because I had uh, a a book I had to write for the David Caceres band. But because I was doing that, um, I I always had my micro cassette on me to make those recordings. And one time I was on an Ed Gerlach band, Ed Gerlach gig. Ed Gerlach he was a, uh tenor player in the Glenn Miller band, and became Houston's most prestigious big band leader. And I was in his band for the last 20 years of its existence, something like that. And so I had my cassette recorder, and Mike Harris played a solo on Satin Dow. And there was stuff in his solo that um I guess you could say borrowed, or you know, but I learned from his solo. I'm not saying thou shalt not learn from me, right? Mike Harris and I were both players on the scene, and I learned from him. My dad taught me to learn from everybody. He says you can learn from everybody. That's not the prevailing thought today, because we've been so overrun by Marxism, and I'm not going to get deep into that because that's not what we're here for. Um, but I've been like listening to a podcast that talks about Marxism in our society, and There's this thing called nihilism. And the idea of nihilism, if I hope I'm getting the right word, there's this idea of nihilism where there's the experts know stuff that you don't know. And this is very, very different from the society that we used to have, at least here in the United States. We used to have that people that said, and this is a Christian thing, by the way, that the better you get at something, the more you realize you don't know anything. That is a more healthy way of living your life. Understanding is called humility, right? Understanding that the the better you are at something, the more you know that that thing you're not very good at it at all. Now you recognize that there's other people that are worse, right? But anyway, that's when I talk about this stuff, in the context of trumpet lessons and stuff like that. Um, nobody knows all of it. Nobody does. And we're talking about now the who should you get your information from. My father told me to learn from everyone. Everyone. There was a kid. I shouldn't say kid because he was a few years older than me. When I was at UTEP, that when it came to learning what to do on the gig, I learned from more from him. He wasn't he wasn't as good of a player as I was. He was my second trumpet player. When I did all the ballet and the opera and that kind of stuff, which I did a bunch of that stuff in El Paso. Um, when I was doing that, he was my second trumpet player. But I learned so much from him, watching him prepare his books, watching him how he paid attention and how he marked his books when there were things to be marked. And this is a guy that officially was not as good as I was. Officially, I say officially because I think he probably was probably better than me in a lot of cases, and I don't know why people have to. Anyway, you see my point, right? Um, this idea that you can learn from everybody is extremely different from today's more Marxist ideal. That in the Marxist world, you learn from the so-called experts. And the truth is, so when I said earlier that it was biblical, what I was saying, um, there's a passage, and I don't remember the verse, where the Apostle Paul says, the more, something along these lines, right? I'm paraphrasing. The more righteous I become, the more I realize I'm not righteous at all. It's the same thing as what we're talking about here. So I don't have a problem with people taking my content and saying, oh, let me study that. I have no problem with that. As long as you do spend time on the legends. Um, yeah, as long as you spend time on the legends, because it's those legends that give us the jazz language. Okay. Larry says, I'm learning some minor skills, but wanting to know the reason, purpose, difference between natural minor, melodic minor, and harmonic minor. Okay. So, first of all, if you're using my tonalization studies, we do not do natural minor. We don't do any of the modes, and natural minor is just the Aeolian mode of the major scale. So we don't practice that because my system would make that redundant. We don't do any of the modes for that reason. to avoid the redundancy. Okay, we don't do it at all. So what is natural minor? Natural minor is just the C major, like if we talk about A natural minor, it's the C major scale starting on A, right? And because my exercises are so thorough, it would be if I had a natural minor book, it would be the exact same book as the major book, but starting on a different note. Everything else would be exactly the same. No, am I saying that you, if you want to work on a natural minor, that you should now play starting in a different spot? No, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think we should have to practice the natural minor. Now, if you need it for a scale test, like if you're a student in school and you need it for that, then I would just practice it as a scale, not in my system. So that's the first one, natural minor. Harmonic minor, we're going to come back to melodic. Okay, harmonic minor is when you you start off with a natural minor, but you raise the seventh scale degree. Now we're talking about an entirely different scale. It's not anything like the major scale. It's not anything like the natural minor scale. It's a completely different animal. So for the A minor, A harmonic minor, the key signature is still no flats, no sharps. But when we get to the seventh note, which in this case is G, we make it G sharp. A, B, C, D, E, F, G sharp, A. I'm not probably singing the right notes. But relatively, those are the right notes. Okay. And yes, I practice that just as much as I practice any other scale besides the major scales. I do three different sets of 20 for the major scales. So yes, I do more major scales than the other stuff. Now, let's talk about melodic minor. I only practice doing the tonalization studies. I only practice the descending. I'm sorry, not descending, the ascending version of the melodic minor. Um, I actually wrote about this in the new book, the tonalization book, about what scales we use it on, what scales we don't use it on. Um, and I actually address what we're talking about right now. The melodic minor. So there's certain scales that I don't teach, and like the blues scale, we don't do the blues scale. And melodic minor is also bebop scale. We don't do the bebop scale. Let me get some lights on. It's gone fuzzy again. So the reason why we don't practice those scales is because they're not scales. The bebop thing is not a scale. The blues thing is not a scale. And in the very same way, but on the classical side, the melodic minor is not a scale. The melodic minor is more of a compositional technique. So when you write a melody in minor, uh, you can use those notes, the sharp six and the sharp seven, to make a nice melody. Um, but there's nothing there to practice with because for those of you who don't know this, the melodic minor has sharps going up and then it's the natural minor coming down. Now, do we practice that when it's on a test? Yes, we got to practice that. But it's not part of the tonalization studies. Now, do I practice melodic minor? I practice the ascending version. Why? because it's the same scale, but a different mode of the altered scale that we use in jazz all the time. It's the same scale. Now, why do I not say practice the altered scale? Because the altered scale starts on a half step. And it just sounds weird when you practice it like that. So I would much rather practice it as the uh, ascending melodic minor so that when I'm practicing it, it gives me a degree of peace. So that when I hit tonic, it sounds like a tonic. If I practice it as a, um, they call it the diminished whole tone scale, right? These scales, there's so many different names for it. Um, if I practice it as a, um, what would we, altered scale. If I practice it as an altered scale, it's unresolved. You get to the end and it sounds like it's not doing anything. Now, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but in one of the Trumpet Chops books, we use the altered scale in the long tones. How cool is that? That's cool, right? Oh, and we actually use it as the altered scale. So I like that, the fact that those two go together. So as far as those scales go, I just think it's very important to avoid the redundancy. And I talk about this in the book. Um, I also think it's important to practice the skills that are appropriate to the music you're trying to play. If you want to play, if you have no interest in jazz, then don't learn the pentatonic scale. Don't learn the ascending melodic minor. Those are for jazz. And you, as a classical player, you won't get the kind of benefit out of that, out of practicing those skills that you would get just practicing literature. Does that make sense? So for the classical guys, I think you should do the the minimum should be the major scales, harmonic minor, um, chromatic, of course, whole tone. Um, and that's about it for the classical guys. There's no need for all that other stuff. You could do the pentatonics. You could do the pentatonics because that'll give you some of that chordal, Quartal, chordal fingerings. But like I said, I think that's better learned in the literature. Get practice the Bartok Concerto for orchestra for stuff like that. And if you want it in every key, do it in every key, as if you're going, changing uh, different keyed instruments. That's what I did with some of the excerpts. Is I practiced them as if I was playing on an F trumpet. Practiced them as if I was playing on a E flat trumpet. Practiced them as if I was playing on a D trumpet. That way, if I ever did have those instruments, that transposition would be like that. So yes, there's a bunch of scales we don't do. It depends on what it is that you're trying to do with your music. I don't believe in just saturating yourself with scales pointlessly. Seppo says, I have been playing through your celebrations duets with my students on our latest lessons. My lessons were finished today, and I become familiar with the first 30 duets. Do you have your favorites? I've got too many favorites from that book. Too many favorites. You know that they're all, except for the last one, they're all on YouTube. Let me get the link. I have so many favorites in that book. I just can't even. Let me see. YouTube. And you know what? I'm not afraid anymore to say that I have a favorite um, of my own stuff. I'm not afraid to say that anymore. I used to be afraid because I thought maybe this sounds arrogant. Um, so let me find the link. There it is. Copy link address. And here we go. There's a link to the celebrations recordings on YouTube. You can click and listen to all of them except for the last one. Why is that? Because the service that I use to generate those albums has 100 song limit. So the celebrations is 101 duets. So yeah. Um, if I had to say what was my favorite, um, I don't know. That would be really hard to do. There's one that I call Cuidate, Mijo. I think that's what I call it. I'll send you a link for that one too. This might be my favorite. I'm not sure. So Cuidate is Spanish for watch out, be careful, right? And Mijo is my son. So Cuidate Mijo means be careful, my son. And that might be my favorite. I don't know. Maybe. That might be my favorite. Nathan, hello Nathan. Nathan says, "What types of music do you play on the flugelhorn?" I play everything on the flugelhorn. I'll play classical music. I'll play, um, yeah, I do everything on the flugelhorn except maybe play lead. I won't play lead on the flugelhorn. That would be like suicide, right? You'd have to push so hard to get anything to project. But yes, I do. I like playing classical music on flugelhorn. I like playing uh, all kinds of stuff on the flugelhorn. I don't. I can't even think of anything besides, like I said, the lead stuff. I won't do lead on it. But I like playing on the flugelhorn a lot. The only time I choose not to play on the flugelhorn is when the band gets too loud. And it's not just because they're loud and I can't hear myself. That's not it. It's because once the band gets to a certain volume, you need some edge in the sound or nobody out front's going to hear it. So there's a lot of stuff that I do prefer to play on flugelhorn in public, right? So anyway, yeah, there's very few things I won't play. Now, how much do I do on my YouTube channel? Not much. You know, I always carry both my flugelhorn and my trumpet with me. Always, always. I always carry both. And that's the reason why. Um, because I like to play it all the time. There's just times when it's not appropriate. Um, you know, back when I was playing with David Caceres, I played with the David Caceres band for 20 years, just shy of 20 years. And I would spend almost a whole 2 hours of a 4 hour gig on the flugelhorn. It wasn't uncommon for me to play almost half of the gig on the flugelhorn. And what is that we're talking about? So, for example, there's a video of me playing Tennessee whiskey. With a band from Austin. Let me put that in the links too. Why is it not letting me do that? Maybe I have to go to my own channel to get the link that way. Yeah. And so this is the kind of thing I would do on a rock gig, but use my flugelhorn. Okay. So that was a live performance at a festival setting, and my wife came with me with the camera and made the recording. And you know what I like about that song? It's in a really sharp key. I don't remember exactly because I play by ear on those kind of gigs. Um, it's either five sharps or six sharps, um, something like that. And yeah, I like playing that song with the flugelhorn. So I don't even think they give the trumpet players in that band. I don't think they give the trumpet players solos all the time like that. Um, they just like the way I play. I haven't played with them in a few months now. I hope they're doing okay. You know how this gig scene is. Things go up, things go down. Seppo says our ensemble is next going into the Seis Mambesos. Would you like to tell some background and more about the piece? Um, I'll tell you what. Out of all my trumpet ensemble stuff, that's one of the oldest. And the idea was to take what I know about salsa and apply that to the trumpet ensemble. So it's not salsa. Don't get me wrong. It's not a salsa song. There are certain elements missing for it to actually be a salsa song, but it is influenced by my many years of playing salsa music. So, for example, um, oh, I can't remember what I wrote, but there's this uh, timbale rhythm that's played. You know, there's a time in the salsa song where the timbale player will switch from the drum heads to start playing the cowbell. And that cowbell rhythm, it does change from one style to the next. Not all salsa is the same style. And so that what the cowbell player plays. Now there's two cowbell players. I shouldn't have said what the timbale player plays on the cowbell. Is a very and I try to include those kinds of rhythms in the piece. Now the name of the piece is made up. Now obviously seis is the word six, and that's the number six comes from the number of players in the band. But the word Mombesos is a contraction that I made up. That's not a real word. Um, so in salsa, they have a section of the song. Salsa has a three-part form. You have the song part of it, right? Then you have the montuno. The montuno is the part where the choir takes turns with the soloist, right? And when we talk about soloist, we're talking about the the singer, the lead singer. So you have the choir, and in salsa they call it the choros, and then you have um, the inspiración, which is like an improvisatory solo between the chorus, and they go back and forth. So you have 4 bars or 8 bars or 2 bars or 6 bars of the chorus, and then you have whatever's left uh, of that a period of time in the solo, and they go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. After that section, the next section is called the mambo, and that's where us horns get to shine. So the word mambo was originally not, well, I don't know which one came first. Actually, I shouldn't say originally. But the word mambo is not just the for that style. You know, you heard of the Mambo Kings, but there's also the mambo section of a salsa song. And the most um, prominent aspect of the mambo section is counterpoint. And it's beautiful counterpoint. I'm going to tell you, the salsa writing is some of the best writing you will ever experience in your entire career. Salsa charts, salsa music. I love to listen to it because it's so rich in counterpoint, and it. If you want to learn how to write music, listen to salsa. There's nothing missing. Nothing missing. You listen to salsa, you're gonna hear some of the best music you've ever heard in your life. Um, Talking about the composition, it's great stuff. Um, so there's the mambo from the salsa song, and then there's the word besos is kisses. So I contracted kisses and mambo to get mambesos. So seis mambesos, that's where the name comes from. And yes, um, it's basically a salsa inspired uh, composition for trumpet ensemble. I wrote it, I believe. See, the copyright dates are not all correct. Um, because I didn't, in the 90s, I didn't care much about copyright. So there were people asking for trumpet ensembles for ITG. And I put that together. I sent it. It was rejected. Um, I wrote it. It was rejected, and then it sat on my hard drive for a long time. That's why the copyright date is not accurate, because it sat on my hard drive for years. So that's the background story. I wrote it to be played at ITG, the International Trumpet Guild. Um, it was not played, and uh, yeah, so it's like I said, out of all the hundreds of trumpet compositions I've written, that was one of the earliest ones. So, all right. Any other questions? Those were good questions, as always. I'm so glad we didn't have the same trouble with the sound this week. Um, I'm sure I did something last week because, sometimes when I get out of dialysis, I'm a little loopy, right? And I don't think to check everything. And Because I have other microphones hooked up, sometimes it'll give me the wrong one. So Julie, hello Julie, says for the modes, I don't play lyric music any longer. I don't know what that means. To remember the mode names in order in a scale. Oh, I see what you're saying. So the modes are, so the C major is gives us the ionic mode. Ionic meaning, well, I don't know. It's the ionic mode and the major scale are the same thing. Okay. Then we have Dorian mode, and after Dorian mode, that's on the second scale. So in the key of no sharps, no flats, Dorian mode is on D. Phrygian mode is on E. Lydian mode is on F. Mixolydian mode is on G. Aeolian mode is on A. And then we have this, what people call the Locrian mode. There is there's no Locrian church. Okay, those other names came from the Greek churches. So there's no technically there's no Locrian mode. That's a music theory thing. Now, do I believe in writing music in those modes? Yes, I do. I commonly do. I'll shift to those modes in the middle of a piece. Sometimes I'll make the whole piece a Dorian piece or a Phrygian piece. I do write in the modes. Just because I say I don't practice the modes does not mean I don't write in those modes. Okay. Seppo says, particularly, I like the dissonance duet and the celebrations. Have you explored to get the most dissonant sounds possible from two trumpets to that? Um, that's kind of sort of what I was going for. Um, kind of sort of. I don't believe in dissonance for its own sake, but like for example, you're talking about the first 30. The dissonance ones in there are meant as educational devices. Um, so like I have one that focuses on half steps and major seventh intervals. I've got one that's whole steps and minor sevenths. I've got one that's tritone. And that's because, I want the students to be able to hear that. I'm sorry, I've got blurry again. Let's see if I can get that to go back. Um, so, yes, I think what you're asking is, did I do that on purpose? And yes, that was on purpose, but not in the way it might sound. I wasn't trying to explore dissonance as its own topic, but I did want the students to be exposed to that. And so let me tell you also about the celebrations book, by the way. So I wrote the celebrations book before PDF technology had become accessible. And before there was PDF technology and print on demand and all that stuff, it didn't pay to have individual books like I do now. It was a very cost wasteful for the cost to have different books. It was always better to have one book instead of many smaller books. And so when the Celebrations project first started, it was not one idea, it was about 7 different book ideas. Actually, it was 6 book ideas, and then my son started playing trumpet, and those first, I guess, about first 25 in the book were for me to play with him, and those got added to the mix. So, so yes, the book, the celebrations book, is actually 7 different books. There is a um, so there's tonalization duets, right? Which tonalization duets? Well, we have some that are in the key of F, G, A flat, all of those different keys. So there are at least 12 major tonalization study books. There's one chromatic tonalization study duet. There's 2 whole tones tonalization duets. There's 3 diminished tonalization study duets, and there's 4 augmented scale duets. And those I consider all to be tonalization study duets. Then we have duets that I wrote as a way to practice counterpoint. And so there are, so all of the contrapuntal ones were going to be one idea for a book. And we have canons in there, we've got fugues, we got all kinds of contrapuntal um, duets in that book. And then there's some jazz ones. Um, what else is in there? Um, yeah. So anyway, the idea was to take all those duet book ideas that I had and just combine them into one book. Today, I wouldn't do it that way because the need for that no longer exists. When people buy a book like Celebrations, they're getting a bunch of duets in the book that they'll never play. That's why we're publishing now the other duets. So, like, we have a beginner level, a second beginner level, and then recently we published the not recently, last year, um, we published the trumpet player duets. Some of them are overlap from the celebrations book, but not a lot. And we're gonna, when time comes, I'll do more of those duet books. Um, Hello, Diego. Learning how modes sound while playing them in a group combo will help you just hear them. Once you get there, you will never think, I'm playing Dorian. You will just go for that. That's right. Note for color and style without thinking about it. Oh, go for that. No, I see. Um, yeah. And here's the thing. My tonalization studies have all of that technique in them. When you do the tonalization studies, you are practicing all of the modes. Keep in mind the word that I used. We don't want to have redundant practice. I'm not saying we don't want that technique to do so. I'm saying that technique is already it reminds me of that old dishwashing liquid commercial, and they're talking, and the woman says, you're soaking in it. You're already doing it, the woman says. You're already getting that they're getting their nails done, right? And she's soaking her nails in whatever it was, Dawn dishwashing liquid or whatever it was. And I always think about that commercial, right? Because that's how the tonalization studies work. You don't need to work on the modes, it's already there. In a similar way, my last trumpet teacher says it's like ragu spaghetti sauce. It's in there. Remember ragu used to say, it's in there. The old ragu commercials. And so He told me that in the context of practicing Petrushka, ba, 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 because I was trying to do Durban says hello. Is that Durban, South Africa, or is that somebody's name? Oh, John Durbin. Tell John Durbin I said hello. Ask him if tell us whether or not he is still with the sufferers. Is he still doing that? So yes. Oh, okay, good. So John Durbin was my student in the 90s. Um, and he was, I don't remember if he was in my improv class. I used to teach at a class at his high school, HSPVA. And he was my student, my private student for a while. So yes, the modes are all, if you're practicing my tonalization studies, the modes are already in there. You don't have to practice them separately. Okay. But you do need to know what they are. Okay. Because some songs will say, like on the chart, it'll say Dorian mode. You need to know what that means so that you know what to do on it. But it's more of a music theory thing than it is a technique thing. If you're practicing my tonalization studies, you already have the technique you need for that. Okay. Um, because it's redundant. It's if you sat down to look at it, you would see what I'm saying. It's the exact same exercise. And yes, you want to be able to do play. There's there's a lot of uh, songs in mixolydian mode. Like for example, the one that comes to mind for me right off the top of my head is Monteca. Right? That's the what do you call it? The mixolydian mode. We have the Dorian stuff that comes up all the time. Dorian, mixolydian. Um, anyway, any other questions? Good questions today. We've got about what is that? About 10 minutes left. You guys know in the old days I would go overtime. With this dialysis stuff, I just can't afford to do that anymore. So when we get to the end, we try to cut it right at 2:30. I had another surgery on Wednesday. I won't show it to you, but it's right here. Um, I don't know how YouTube reacts to like surgery like stuff, right? Maybe they'll would I wouldn't want them to delete this video or whatever, you know. Um, Diego asked, "Am I going to do turkey trot this year?" Well, I've got two answers for that. Unfortunately, turkey trot closed down. Yeah, turkey trot closed down. They don't do it anymore. But I've stopped running, and the reason I stopped running is because, well, for now, it's because I have this tube sticking out of my chest, and I don't want the weight of it pulling down. Um, but also, my my kidneys are still sort of functioning, and it doesn't make sense to me to batter my body like that. So I'm only walking as my cardio. I just walk. Um, Seppo says our ensemble is also going into the Trumpets of Jubilee. Shorten that first. Would you like to tell some more of that piece? Yes, I would. Um, so, Trumpets of Jubilee took me like 10 years to write. That's the biggest news. When I talk about it, it's like that took me so long. And the idea was to write a piece that you could have so many different choirs facing off against each other. So with the number 12, you have four groups of three, you have three groups of four, you can have six, you can have duets facing against each other. It's such a flexible um, instrumentation, right? There's so much you can do with it. And of course, you have also the grand tutti, right, where everybody's playing. There's that it starts off with this fanfare, right? And 12 is also happens to be the number of notes in the chromatic scale. And the last note in that fanfare has all 12 chromatic notes in it. so, um, uh, why did it take so long to write? Because I knew that it would not be played. And I have this aversion to writing stuff that's just going to sit on my hard drive for years and years and years and years. Why did I finally finish it? Well, not finish it, but I did finish it earlier. I'm sorry, I gave the wrong impression. Um, why did I finally record it? Because I could, right? It's me sitting here at home, I can play all the parts. That's why I went forward with it. Um, it was originally just something I was doing um, to explore those different combinations. And when you look at the score, you see it's I'm moving all those parts around. Um, Now it also utilizes so let me break down the form for everybody that doesn't know the piece. It's this very dissonant fanfare at the beginning. Ends on that note that I just told you about with all 12 notes in the chromatic scale. Um, then we start the fugue. I'm gonna call it a fugue. I know technically it's not really a fugue, right? Um, it's more like the opening statement of a fugue, but instead of going, if you have a real fugue, it has what they call episodes, and episodes um have that like descending thing that they do with the different, you know. Um Instead of going to episodes, I went to this mesh thing because I wanted to also have that where everybody had their own thing going, right? And you could hear stuff going on, but everybody had a different part, 12 different parts. This is in huge contrast to the stuff at the beginning, which was everybody playing together, right? Like I told you, all 12 notes, all 12 chromatic notes in one chord. Well, same thing. I mean, the other end of the spectrum on the mesh, I call it a mesh, right? Everybody's playing their own thing. The only thing that sort of an exception to that is there are between the first trumpet and the fourth trumpet or the fifth trumpet, there are some octaves, but that was necessary because without those octaves, that melody would have been lost. That melody, there's no way that melody would have come through over that big mess, right? And in fact, I'm still concerned sometimes that melody is completely lost. So so we go we I'll start over again. We go from the fanfare to the fugue. I'm still calling it a fugue. Then to the mesh, then back to another fugue. And I think I have on the second time around, if I remember right, there's might be two openings, two different themes, what we would call themes when we study fugues, two different themes on the second time around. Then we go back to the mesh again, and then we end the song. And I think on the very end we go back to that same. It's not the same uh, exact 12. You know, it's the same exact 12 notes. So what am I saying? The same voicing of those notes. I think it's different at the end, but it's just as dissonant. I think. It's been a while since I looked at it, but that's basically it. There's I call it trumpets of jubilee. Why do I call it that? Um, are there 12 trumpets in the Bible when we talk about the jubilee? I don't know. It might be seven, it might be 12. Maybe that's why I called it that. I don't remember now. Uh, so Kevin says YouTube is weirdly picky. That's right. Diego says, do you have thoughts on solid one-piece trumpet mouthpieces versus two or three-piece mouthpieces? Not really. I do have a kit that I bought from Warburton that I experiment with, but let me tell you, I'm still experimenting. Like I had a gig. It wasn't a gig. It was a memorial service for a band leader that died on Sunday. And I had a rough night on everything that was high and loud. Everything else was fine. And I thought it was me because, I've been sick and I'm not fully back into the gigging thing yet. Um, I'm getting back, but I haven't been spending as much time. And and so I just thought my chops weren't up to it. But when I'm at home, it's not like that. So I just thought maybe playing loud. It might have been the mouthpiece I've been tinkering with. Maybe, and I'm going to test that this week. I didn't practice much this week as much as I would have liked because of these surgeries and doctor visits and all stuff like that. I'm hoping this is coming to an end, all this doctor stuff. The cardiologist said I don't have to come back in 6 months. Woohoo! So anyway, so yes, I'm when I have the opportunity, I'm gonna get my tuner out and start playing loud and high to see what happens on the tuner on that mouthpiece. It only dawned on me afterwards, after I had apologized to the other trumpet player about my chops, because every time we had unison together in the upper register, it was terrible. I was embarrassed. And then it dawned on me it could be that mouthpiece. So my point is, you can tinker with that stuff forever and not find what you're looking for. I used to do that with trumpets in the 80s and the 90s. I used to buy pieces and put stuff together. And I think I was inspired by Doc Severinsen. Someone told me, I don't know how true it is. You know, you get all this stuff that afterwards you realize they could have just like not known what they were talking about. But someone told me in the 80s that the reason they call him Doc Severinsen was because he was always doctoring his instruments. So so I was kind of influenced by that, and I would buy lead pipes and bells and stuff like that and mix match stuff. But you know, in the end, it's just so much easier to buy something that works. So I think the purpose of the two piece and the three piece is to give you that opportunity to try stuff out. But if all you are is like constantly searching, I don't see the what benefit that is. There has to be a resolution there. There has to be a time when you say, "Oh yeah." And I think sometimes when we experiment too much like that, it becomes an endless search. Seppo says, does the name Jubilee refer to the 50 year? Yes, that's it. And they have like Jubilee, like there's all kinds of like, it's actually the 49th year, isn't it? Or something like that. It's it's seven times seven. And then you have that last year. That's right. So seven times seven gives you 49, and then the extra year is your jubilee. But they have trumpets that play during that time, and if I'm not mistaken, maybe it's 12 trumpets, and maybe that's why I called it this piece. Called this piece "Trumpets of Jubilee." And because it took like 50 years to write it. I'm exaggerating. I'm sorry. I hope that's not sacrilegious. Um, so yeah. All right, guys, we're out of time. Thanks for hanging out. Um, I always enjoy uh Diego says God bless you. Thank you, man. Um, and we'll see you guys next time. God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend. All right, bye.